The program will begin momentarily. And now, introducing Marissa Moran.
Hi, welcome everyone to the Pacific Council discussion with the Filmmakers of Immigration Nation. Glad to have you with us tonight. I'm Marissa Moran, the Chief Communications Officer at the Pacific Council, and I'll be moderating the discussion with Christina Clusiau and Shaul Schwarz. We'll start with about 30 minutes of conversation among the three of us, and then we'll open it up to your questions, which you can submit in the Q&A box at any time. Christina and Shaul, thank you for joining us for this event. Some of you on the line, and also Christina and Shaul, you may have heard that the Pacific Council started a new program recently called the Culture Club to bring members together virtually to discuss topical media, and your docuseries Immigration Nation was the first one that we told members to watch. The Culture Club just met before our discussion here, and I'm sure that many of them are on the line now. While I'm introducing the speakers, you're going to see a quick poll that asks how many of you on the line have seen Immigration Nation so that we know what your exposure has been to the series already. So please submit your answer on the poll that you'll see pop up, and we'll share the results in a minute. So while that comes up, I will go ahead and introduce Christina and Shaul and tell you a little bit about their backgrounds. They're both based in Brooklyn, New York, and are co-founders of Real Peak Films, an Emmy Award-winning production company that produces documentaries. As a documentary filmmaker and cinematographer, Christina has made Emmy Award-winning productions like Trophy about animal conservation and A Year in Space. She also recently worked on the Netflix documentary series Unnatural Selection. Shaul is a filmmaker, cinematographer, and a photojournalist, and his work has appeared in Time Magazine and National Geographic. He's directed content for Netflix, Discovery Channel, History Channel, and CNN. He's also worked on Trophy, A Year in Space, and Unnatural Selection. I'm just going to close that out. Hopefully you all saw the poll come through. So of course, Real Peak Films made Immigration Nation and the docuseries that's now on Netflix that we'll be discussing today, and it relates to immigration policy. This series gave unprecedented access to the operations at ICE and also featured stories about specific immigrants and their stories crossing the border, and really tried to humanize the what we understand is this very complex, often politicized system. So today we're going to be today that conversation will really focus on the policy angle of what was revealed in Immigration Nation. Sumaya, do you have the results from that poll? Okay, so you should all see now that great. Okay, so we see 88% of everybody on the line has seen Immigration Nation on Netflix. So I'm glad that you all have that baseline understanding. Apologies that I have to be on my phone today. I had some technical difficulties, so it might be a bit of an odd angle sometimes, but it's not about me anyway. So we're going to go ahead and launch into the questions. So again, we'll do about 30 minutes of Q&A, and if you have questions, you can submit them in the Q&A box, and we will get to that and have an opportunity to answer your questions later. So my first question is really about how this, I found that this docuseries, first of all, it was really well done. So congratulations on this important project. I found that it really revealed a strong law enforcement rhetoric of good versus bad, and that immigrants are criminals, just flat out. That seemed to be the baseline understanding that a lot of the folks involved in ICE and also on the local law enforcement side that was the narrative that they seemed to have about immigration, which would then justify ICE arrests and detentions. While this is a narrative that permeates law enforcement across the country, and it's really why we're seeing, I think, the current trends and demands for change that we saw in this country ongoing, especially this summer, the issue is clearly more nuanced than that. So Christina and Shaul, could you talk about how from your perspective, how can the average American citizen better understand the nuances of immigration as a larger issue and try to see and understand the humanity of the people that are crossing the border illegally?
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think that's what we really wanted. You know, we wanted to humanize the whole. People are very angry, and as you said, this is a very politicized issues, and we felt uh, largely that people just don't understand what's going on. I'll give an example to actually start. We made it a point to work a lot in our hometown, New York, and we would tell friends we would go out, you know, with ICE, make arrests, and see so much activity right from when the administration started, and our friends would kind of say, "Oh, you're working on immigration. How's the border?" And it was this immediate understanding that, wait a minute, this is actually, you know, there's 500,000 immigrants here. And so I think we wanted to take away a lot of these unknown stereotypes and take away, hopefully, some of the political rhetoric and really make people understand. And so, you know, on one hand, what we enjoyed, what was really rare, is this unprecedented access to ICE. I think what we felt largely is that officers will do the job they are put, and they have a very difficult job. And let's face it, ICE, you know, all police officers have a hard job, particularly in this time in this country. And ICE is the agency that shifts the strongest in a very quick time under new political forces. So to us, while I think a lot of people seeing the show were very frustrated, maybe with ICE officers on a personal level, to us, what was frustrating is the failure of the system at large. And it's something that we saw, it's probably the only thing that everybody agreed on, that the system's broken. It's been broken for a while, and it's definitely gotten worse under this administration. And I think the other point in your question, we wanted you, the viewers, to get to meet a little bit this kind of the immigrant. It sounds so far to some people, like our friends in New York who asked, "How's the border?" while we're sitting in a bar, and probably the guy washing the dishes there. And it doesn't end at that. There's so many levels. So I think we tried to humanize all those sides and bring a little bit of discussion that was very raw, because what we uncovered was very raw, but also very real, and get people into the thick of things as quick as we could.
Completely understand that. And I really do think that there's no better way to do that through documentaries. Christina, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Shaul pretty summed that up really well. You know, I think that that's kind of what we were after. So.
Absolutely. In my previous career, I guess, I worked in the social impact entertainment space. So really looking at how movies, film, you know, television can change minds, change hearts and minds and behaviors even. And often, even though it's focused more on entertainment, it is, you know, something that really we would look at documentaries to really understand, which documentaries can sometimes, I think, be considered entertainment, but also it's usually understood that if you're watching it, you're looking to learn about something too, right? Not just escape, as entertainment often does. So in the sense that from documentaries, we would learn lessons and try to apply, you know, what documentarians are learning when it comes to using media to spread a social message. So were you hoping for a particular outcome by producing this series? And have you seen any change arise as a result of it?
You know, I think initially we really cast kind of a broad net into understanding this world of, we didn't know too much about it. And I think that's one thing that through the process we learned, is that there was a lot of issues around immigration that were featured in the series that we didn't know existed. For example, like deported veterans. You know, I think many people don't realize that deported veterans is a thing, is an issue. And so how we came across it is we were actually in El Paso on a shoot unrelated to deported veterans, and they were doing a Hugs Not Walls, where families were able to greet each other at the border for 5 or 10 minutes, and then they went back to their separate sides. And we were on the Mexico side, and there was an individual there that had a US military uniform on. And we kind of questioned him. We said, "Oh, are you military?" And he's like, "No, I'm a deported veteran." And we looked at each other. We were like, "What do you mean a deported veteran?
How is that possible?
How is that possible?" And he said, "Well, there's 27 of us over at this bunker here." And so I think it was some of those type of things that we really, as the series progressed, we started to understand that those are important and bring a larger, issue to these issues because they were unknown.
I think it's a good example of something that we initially thought a lot of people can agree. We tend to come to immigration conservative, liberal, and just kind of yap at each other very quickly, particularly these days. But really, when you get into the thick of things, let's face it, it is a complicated system, and the majority of people do not understand the issue. And so, ironically, what we didn't want people to say, "Oh, it's complicated, I don't know." We wanted, because when this, like deported veteran, is a good example that we hope most people can agree on. Most people say, "Wait a minute, I didn't know. This is wrong. Why is this happening?" By the way, this didn't start under the Trump administration. It started under the Clinton administration. So it wasn't only new, and again, it tied to that broken system. And this kind of systemic wrong that we kept seeing is, I think, something that quite shocked us, because early on we would kind of get to some of these issues and we would be like, well, this case, we just talked to this person and it seems so wrong. I'm sure somebody is going to come across it and make sense of this, because we're America. We make sense. Sure, there's things that go wrong. There's different political arguments, but generally, we make sense. And the thing that doesn't work in the system is that it really does not make sense. Things are just broken. Things are so arbitrary. And that is something we wanted to bring people into the fold of that and really let them experience that, but not only in policy talk, but being able to look at an individual, to look at the toll, to look at what happens to families, and especially in these days. And I think that's kind of what brought us
I think
deeper.
Additionally, too, you read so many times about individual stories, and it's usually an article, and you never are able to put a face to a name. And I think that was something that we really strove hard to do in this series, is to bring forth individuals that are usually pushed into the shadows. So a viewer can really connect to a person and to a family to deeper understand what's happening in their lives and their situation. And same with the other side. There's, it's not normal for a film crew to embed with ICE for such a long period of time. And so to be able to be within the system was also, allowed us to show a different viewpoint of what's happening within the system, to bring more awareness, because it's really hard to understand what's going on if you're not day to day. And as for what we've seen concrete changes, we haven't seen, what we've really seen is that people have been excited about the series, that a lot of people have watched the series. We've seen a lot of people discussing along social media and different Zoom events.
University education programs. I mean, Netflix is an amazing platform, and it's a little bit like what you said. It's a little bit of entertainment, although we are aware it's a tough show. It's a little bit of an educational thing. But I think the change we did see is millions of people who usually would not know in-depth immigration and would just get lost have watched the show. And we hope they continue caring, because we really feel that everybody can agree that the system's broken, and thus we should not settle, and thus we should create change.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I can't help but wonder how you got that access to ICE. I mean, how did you convince them to let you in and to follow you that whole time?
Yeah.
Or for you to follow them that whole time?
The relation actually started way prior to us getting access for this show. Shaul had a pretty good relationship from a previous project he did about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When he was working with DHS and Homeland Security investigations along the border. And the spokesperson he was working with was somebody that they had stayed friends and were acquaintances throughout the years. And so Shaul kept on going back over the years saying, I'm interested in immigration. Let's do a project about immigration. And
The original work
no.
I did with DHS was more related to drug trafficking, a subject I dealt with a lot, which DHS works on. So yeah.
Yeah, so he kept on saying, no, nobody's complaining. Everything's quiet in the immigration sphere. Why would we let journalists in to document? And when Trump was elected, we went back down to DC and had lunch with the same individual. And we said, I think now, and this was at the point in time where we were already starting to see some of these policies be put into effect to install fear and to deter. And so we kind of broached him and said, listen, I think now you're going to get some heat and some pushback. Why don't you let us in to document and to show what the offices are up against and what the day-to-day workings of ICE is happening. And they agreed, and so we spent a couple months and talking about a contract, and which allowed for certain things they were allowed to view the footage as a cut, and they were able to comment on anything that was factually inaccurate, anything that was law enforcement sensitive, and anything that violated privacy rights. And so beyond that, we were actually kind of given a lot of leeway to work within their field offices throughout the country. And some offices didn't want to participate. We came out to LA, and actually the office out here didn't want to participate because there was already such a climate of divisiveness, according to them. And so they didn't want to be on camera. A lot of them would say, I don't even tell my brother what I do for a living. But other places in the country were much more open to us being there. And that's kind of how the relationship were forged. And we started to look at different areas of the country where different issues were happening. For example, in New York, where it's a city of immigrants, North Carolina was very focused on local elections. Florida, where it wasn't so much about ICE, but it was much more a worker story. El Paso. And so we started to look at different areas in the country in these field offices that we had a good relationship with to keep on following.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Completely understand the complexities there. And it sounds like that could have been such a production conundrum, but such an important story to tell that, again, is, has not really been told to that extent. So I appreciate the work that you did. As a viewer, I appreciate the work that you did to get that access. Something else that I wanted to ask, somewhat related to what you were sharing, was especially, you mentioned the privacy, protecting privacy. How, as a documentarian, how do you protect, I would say, how do you make sure that you tell stories with integrity, especially when you're interviewing and working with very vulnerable people who, again, could, be arrested the next day, whose lives are on the line, whose families are suffering? I mean, there's no lack of suffering in the stories that you told. And so I'd be very interested to hear about how you approach that with integrity and really giving proper agency and voice to the people that you're working with.
Yeah, it's a great question, Marissa. It wasn't easy, is the honest truth. It was very hard. We did have this carte blanche, incredible access, but we would need to, even though many times we tried to work what we called inside out, inside the system, the uniqueness of the access, to tell the outside, those who are affected, usually the immigrants. And, first of all, we would ask, and many times we would get no. When we did get yes, it really turned into a much longer relationship. And we would make sure, sometimes, we just couldn't tell the full story as a truth, and we would end up editing it out or stopping to pursue it. For obvious reasons, like asylum, like people who get deported and are now coming back. Are we endangering them? How does that work? There was a lot of things that made the show very difficult. It was also very difficult for us to embed while working with the immigrants. So there was this push and pull at times. For example, in North Carolina, we worked with ICE while we worked with the resistance trying to stop. And, we had shooters. We were shooting on both sides, and we had to stay completely disciplined and silent. We knew a raid is coming. We can't tell these people, even if we feel for them. We knew what the resistance is going to do. So there was a lot, you would knock on a door at 6 a.m. and we are coming in with ICE agents. And very quickly, in my broken Spanish, I would say, listen, we are not with them. We are press. May we come in? And more often than not, we would get a no, and sometimes we would get a yes. And that would start a process. And in that process, we'd kind of start choosing stories of people who, seem to really repeatedly want to tell their story. I'll give one more example, if it's okay. When we got in touch with Caesar, the deported veteran, um, he told us on a research call that he would want to be in the show and that he's a fugitive, and that he really wants to tell his story. And we immediately said, okay, we're gonna like work with your location and think how to do this carefully, not to get you into more heat, but I want you to talk to your wife and make sure that you want to do this. And Caesar kind of said, a Marine never hides. And while I felt that was a cool answer, I was kind of wondering in my head if he had actually digested what he's doing. And so we kind of prolonged and waited. And I remember about a month, we chat a couple of times. About a month in, we were actually at his house sitting with his wife. And I was like, Caesar, we could back out of it now. You are taking a risk, and I would love for you to do it, but have you really thought about it? And he kind of thanked us and said, we did actually have this come to Jesus moment and said, no, this is worth fighting for. But a lot of the stories would be like that. And quite frankly, there was incredible stories that we couldn't tell. And there were many.
I think it was also really important for us to show people spaces. I think that's something that there was a number of stories we came across that people were like, yeah, you can show me, but I need to remain anonymous. And I think for us, we struggle with that a lot, because there's always this feeling that, okay, then we too are perpetuating the stereotype of putting people in the shadows. So even though there's an idea of protection and, identity and all of that, we really pushed hard to tell people stories that were willing to tell their whole, as much as they could of their story and how they would show themselves, because we felt like that you need to connect to people when you're watching film. And that was one way that we were able to. We didn't want to keep perpetuating that narrative of this is them and this is us. And even though it was sensitive, we worked really hard to be able to tell the stories we did.
I will say that I think some people, particularly, for example, fathers who were separated from their children during children's separation, I think they felt a very strong need to talk. And I think they were fearful, and they had a little bit what to lose. But they also found some dignity in somebody actually, excuse my French, but giving a shit, because most people didn't in that system. And I think it felt very, very hard and isolating. And they felt they were on the right side of history to let people tell the story. And that was something that in dark times really empowered us, to know that people that are caught in this machine that really tears lives apart at least have this channel to talk. And I do credit, by the way, ICE for allowing it, even though we had a difficult relationship then. And these are not easy times for journalists in this country, but we were able to do it, and I see the value in it.
I'm grateful that you really took, it sounds like a really compassionate position, and again, put people's humanity at the center of this project, because we don't see that in the broader immigration system. And so, as a viewer and as someone in the international policy space, really appreciate that, and thank you for that. I do want to remind the audience that you can submit your questions via the Q&A or the chat feature, and we will be able to start asking audience questions shortly. I do have one more question that I'd like to put forward to the filmmakers, which is, I'm thinking about for those of you who have seen the series, and even if you just got through a few episodes, you would probably remember the very first episode. In the very first scene, that there is that knocking on the door, and it's a very kind of tense moment. And one of the ICE officers, I believe, says that he has a warrant, but he doesn't have to show it to come inside. And I was surprised to hear that as a citizen who's always, we're just, believe in criminal justice and everything. We've come to understand that police need warrants to come inside, or anybody, looking for something. And I'm curious to know if, first of all, if that's true, and then also any other policies, or specific up close and, personal things that you witnessed that, like we've said, arbitrary a few times. Some of these policies seem arbitrary. They are often, frightening or even dehumanizing. Do you have other examples of things like that specifically within the system? I realize there are probably quite a few. And also, what do you think are some specific policies that need to change in order to fix what we've all referred to now as a broken system?
Yeah, we'll start with the first.
Yeah, I can start with so the ICE operates generally, this was the fugitive ops team. And so they generally operate under an idea of an administrative warrant, which is not a criminal warrant. So what that means is when you go to somebody's house, you may have a removal. It's just an immigration violation to say that this is my target, this is the person that I'm going after, this is the person that needs to be come into custody and be removed. But what they can't do is they can't break down the door. They
can't enter the house without permission.
So they have to knock on the door and ask somebody to say, I'd like to come in and talk to you. And so they use many different tactics in order to get access, including, we know that somebody lives here, we're doing an investigation, somebody that has been using this address, can I come in and talk to you?
They will do anything they can to get through that door. That is what they see as their goal. And they will walk a very thin line of legality.
Yeah.
I'm police. They are police, but they won't say they're ICE. They would show a picture and say, not the picture of the person they're looking for, and say, hi, is Jim here? And show a picture of not Jim, because they know that the person opening the door wants to protect Jim. But once Jim is brought to ask who it is, they flip it and show Jim. There's many tactics that they use to walk a very thin line. Or they will get some kind of, yes, you can come in, or let me come out, I can't hear you, and step in. It's a very thin line, and to them, that's their job, that's their goal. They see it as the right thing. It's questionable at best at times.
And I think too, they also, a lot of times for example, in New York, there was such a lot of groups, immigration rights groups and advocacy groups that would put out the messaging to say, do not let them in. When they come to the door, you don't have to let them in. It is your right. And so they would, creatively make up new tactics all the time in order to be able to get entrance, because that's their main goal. They need to get past the door in order to.
So we would see stuff like, hi, we're police. People don't want to open the door. We're going to knock on your door every day at 6 a.m. until you open this door. Where's the landlord? Where's the super live? So things that, you doubt. I've very rarely seen somebody says, hi, I'm looking for this, and someone opened the door. Now you could feel for the officers, they are trying to do the job. And essentially one thing the Trump administration has done, they've made them so kind of famous being bad that people tend to not cooperate. So it's a double-edged thing. As for your second kind of bigger policy question of what needs to change, we can spend an hour just talking about that. But I think I think people should be careful a little bit of laying most of the blame on ICE, and specifically on ICE officers. While they are part of the system, they are the enforcers of the system. Bodies such as USCIS that grant visas have, under this administration, become effectively, they've weaponized their bureaucracy. And instead of allowing people and thinking, they are constantly guided on how to not allow, and how to really, to use their language, block shithole countries and issues like that. What we saw more and more is a very systemic, on purpose weaponizing of the system. We would tell people, look, conservatives, look, okay, you want to build a wall. Great. Let's say we agree on it or not. What do you think about letting people who are doing it the right way? Because everybody loves to say do it the right way, and they say, oh, there's people who do it the right way. They just come in. Well, we all know, or we should know, and if you've watched the show, you know that that's absolutely not true. I think the biggest change we need to create, again, there's so many specifics. We need an immigration court that actually doesn't work for the prosecutor. That's not a court, that's a puppet. We need a USCIS to not be led by people who are trying on purpose to not let people in. We need, ICE not to be, we've seen really the thugs, I'm sorry to say, and the real hardliners becoming the heads of the agency. But most importantly, as a country, we need to think what we can actually agree on. Because yes, the system is complicated, but we love using the example of deported veterans. I haven't found many conservatives or liberals that have told me we should actually deport people who served in the army. When it comes to DACA, almost everybody agrees on some kind of relief. There's many more. We can disagree on some and find a way, but the issue is so politicized that we kind of don't do anything as a country. And under this administration, the weaponizing of the systems has been extremely, I would call it un-American, unfair, on purpose to defeat people, and the toll is horrendous. And I think that's something we really set out to show.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most surprising things I felt through this whole thing, and even now as I continue to talk about the series, is that we really watched the systematic way that the administration was able to use, not even changing laws, but use the laws that are already in place to work it towards their advantage, and the messaging to be from the top down to say that, your initiatives is to deter, is to get people to make it so terrible that they do not want to come and they do not want to live here, and that it's so terrible for them to be in detention and to wait out their case for 18 months that they're just going to give up. And I think that's something that, after 3 years you start to see, and it was never, for me, it was never the individual officer. To me, they were just a part of the system, and they all together, of course, they create this terrifying system, but it was really these administrative black holes and these bureaucratic things of that you check the wrong box, you write your name incorrectly, all of these small things that add up to your case being delayed and delayed and delayed. And a good example is the Berta in episode 5, how she did everything the right way. She came here, she asked for protection, she was an asylum seeker. They detained her, they did not parole her into the country to wait for her case or her court case. And 18 months later, she was still there. And to us, that was one thing that we kept on saying, the whole point of that is to deter, to make her feel make it so hard for her to she has a really strong case, but make it so hard for her to feel that she's just gonna leave.
And for everybody around to say, oh, you shouldn't come because this lady, she has a very strong case.
And she's been 18
She's
months.
older, she's proved everything. She was able to pay a lawyer, and look at her, she's rotten in detention.
And she unfortunately was deported and now has fled again. And so she's not in any better situation, which just proves more is that, the system itself has used so many tactics to just deter people. And I think that was the most surprising thing.
So are we finding that the I guess these determined strategies are working in the sense that people applying for asylum, the number of people applying for asylum is decreasing, even if the amount being allowed in and being accepted is decreasing? Do you know if the number of applicants is decreasing?
Look, if you count a success as creating refugee camps on our borders, then to some degree it's working. Eventually, will less people come? Maybe. But I beg to ask the question, after 4 years of the Trump administration, do we have less undocumented people in this country? No. Are undocumented people in this country more likely to cooperate with authorities and, let's say, report crime? No. They're actually, they don't believe anybody, so they go deeper into the shadows. Have we changed who picks our crops in California or milks our cows? And there's a very flat argument with some numbers, but when you look at the whole, no, it's succeeded if your goal is to cause pain to the tour, but it's not solved anything. It's not created substantial change. And for those in asylum specifically, sure, there is a loophole there. A lot of people use that unfairly. And I think they should be weeded out, by the way. We believe in order. We believe that you should come in through the door, not jump the window. But people who truly are scared, people like Berta, when she got deported, she turned around, a 67-year-old woman who was completely broke, and the same day started marching back because she was really scared for her life. And honestly, when you spend a lot of time at the detention centers on the border, you could pretty quickly tell who's making it up and who is really desperate. And desperate people will do desperate things. So they will believe less in the system. They will not come to the port of entry like she did. And they will walk forward and either make or get caught or die in the desert. But this is kind of the trend it's creating. I would argue that it's very unsuccessful.
Yeah, that's fascinating and frustrating, of course. I mean, the whole topic, it can be very frustrating. And, you know, we're an international policy organization here at the Pacific Council. And so something that, you know, I think we've published about in our online magazine and had discussions about is those root causes that are driving people out of their home countries, right? And what is spurring that need to seek asylum, and especially in Central America, and the lawlessness that people are experiencing, and what's understanding those complexities, which of course most Americans don't, right? Because so few of us do look beyond our borders. Just, of course, given the problems that we have at home, right? There's enough to kind of sink our teeth into here, or sink our woes into in a way. But really, once you start to understand the problems, especially in Central America, or even, you know, we of course understood some of the personal situations that people were facing. I remember the woman in your docuseries, the woman in Uganda who had faced such horrific violence, and was it acid, probably lye, thrown on her. How can you expect someone to not seek a better opportunity somewhere else, and thinking that the US is the ultimate in that? It creates a whole new layer of understanding. I do want to start taking some questions from the audience. I've seen a few come through, and I think we have touched on some of these, but I'm going to go ahead and ask them anyway, if you guys would like to add something to these. All right, one of these questions was, given the sensitive status of these families and individuals, how willing were they to open up to you, and how do you build trust with them? I know we did touch on this in one of the questions. I'm not sure if you wanted to add any other details there beyond what you shared.
I think building trust is always a tricky thing as a filmmaker. You know, you are coming into people's lives with this big camera and these, you know, share your story. We want to document what you're going through. And I think a lot of it is a process. You know, I think we talked about before, like the sensitivity of the subject. But in general, I mean, anything that we do, you have to build trust with your characters. You have to have like a willing participation between you and them in some format in order to really, for it to come across on camera. You very quickly can tell when somebody doesn't necessarily trust you, or, you know, is acting to camera. I think especially even within ICE, it was, you know, a lot of times they feel like, oh, this is just going to be paint a terrible picture of us, or, you know, it's just going to be one of these shows where I'm supposed to do this and this and this. And, you know, you have your camera, you spend so much time jumping around with that. You probably, like, a lot of times I don't agree with many of the officers. Sometimes I found commonality, but when you put the camera down and you actually talk to people, you start to find some sort of commonality, some sort of common ground to talk about their kids, their family. And so then when you start to pick the camera back up again, it kind of breaks the wall, and there's a trust that's established. And I think that's something that is learned for a filmmaker. It takes a while to learn how to do that. And I think between Shaul and I and other team members, awful personality. He has a strong personality with some people. People are more, talk to me more easily on some other things. It's really the dance.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Let me see. We had one more question here in the chat. What stood out to you as the problems in the immigration system that are most easily fixable? Is there any low-hanging that struck you as a good starting point for politicians to act on a bipartisan basis? I know you touched on deported veterans as an issue that seemed to bridge the aisle or span the aisle. Were there any other, especially in that low-hanging fruit, in terms of possible small and easy fixes that don't even necessarily rely on the administration?
I think for me, like, worker visas is one thing. You find, especially the story that we followed in Florida, of so many undocumented individuals that come to rebuild cities after disaster. They live in fear, but they're providing need, and people want to have them as workers. And there's got to be a way for there to be a very easy way to create worker visas that are more accessible to more people, that don't necessarily, are not necessarily a path to citizenship, but allow for people to be here, to work, to get a driver's license, have an ID, to not live in fear, to make, to be protected and have rights. And I think that's something.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think it'll be easy to change because the campaigning style is so these people take away our jobs. So it is absolutely not true when you're in the field. And as much as there's been a crackdown on immigration for the most part, it would be very easy to roll into a field in Northern California and arrest literally hundreds a day and not spend so much time that ICE spends on knocking on a door to get one person. But the truth is, nobody wants to do it because there's nobody else taking those jobs. And there's whole fields of our economy that depend, such as agriculture and construction and many others, that really depend on immigrant labor. And to some degree, it's kind of like almost, I don't want to call it slave labor, but it's cheap labor that is in a wrongful way. And I hate to say it, but it didn't start under this administration at all. So it seems, if you campaign, that there's a lot of question on it, but in practicality, conservatives and liberal have done very little about it. Maybe they could do more about workers' visa, because I think if you did allow workers' visa, even on condition that if you take this visa, you cannot get to a green card. You could put a lot of limitations. I believe that if you did that, you would fill jobs that won't hurt the American economy, and you would get the number of people, let's say, misusing asylum way down. A lot of these people that come here for work, they don't actually want to stay here. There's a lot of things they like about America. There's a lot of things that they want to send money home and eventually go back, and this is a great opportunity. What that would do is, for example, really take a toll on the cartels, who really rely on these people, and they are used to paying a lot of money to them. Well, we charge them $4,000 for a visa. So there's a lot of things that could be done like that, that when you really are day to day in the immigration world, you understand that they've been so driven up these political dogfights that it's very hard, unfortunately. It's not low-hanging fruit, but if you actually sit everybody in the room, they could be low-hanging fruit. So that's, I'll always go back to, let's think on what we can agree on, because that is, I think that's substantial. But it's hard because we tend to scream at each other very quickly on this issue and not listen.
Absolutely. Well, let's hope for a brighter future for our immigration system, whether or not that has anything to do with the administration changing, or just concerned citizens or even, activists like I hope you don't mind if I call you activists. I know that you're first and foremost documentary filmmakers, but I can tell that you're very passionate about this. So I think we're all really hoping that there will be some solutions posed. I have not seen any other questions come in from the audience. Last call for audience questions. I have exhausted mine, so we might be wrapping up sooner. Do either of you have some closing remarks that you'd like to share or last thoughts?
I think one thing that we saw when the series launched back in August is that there was a lot of people reaching out to us asking how they could directly help individual families. And so we put together a GoFundMe page that's trying to raise money specifically for some of the families in the series, because a lot of them have lost their jobs due to COVID. They have, legal bills to pay. There's educational bills. So that's something that we put out, and it's a GoFundMe. Do you have the link that we could share?
We do. I think we can probably drop that in the chat here. And if not, we can certainly follow up with the folks on the call. There it is. It just went into the chat. Thank you, Sumaya.
A little will go a long way in these situations. And also, if you just be willing to share, we're trying to continue to get a little bit more traction and get a little bit more funds for these individuals before we close out the GoFundMe. But if you can share it on social media or in your communities, we would really appreciate it.
Yeah, and for me, I guess on a bigger note, I think a lot of, you said earlier, and I agree to that, and I think it makes a lot of sense that most Americans, they have so much to deal with that this doesn't come to the front. And I understand that, I truly do. What's sad to me is it's a little bit become the story of them, not the story of us. And unless you're Native American, somewhere, somehow, someone in your past came here. And maybe they had papers, but more often than not, they didn't. And historically, we saw that as literally part of the American dream. And we romanticized it on black and white pictures of these immigrants coming. And we had this understanding that this country and this American experiment is greater because of the fact that it attracts the different, that we're all treated equal, that no matter your God, your sex, your religion, we have the right to some kind of opportunity. And I think it made America better. I think it attracted talent. I think it made us great. A little bit pun intended, that is part of the fabric. And I want to remind people that it's not the story of them, it's a story of you. It's not so far. It's not just on the border. It's in your history. It's in your community. So I know it's hard to care, but I think no matter your views, the system is broken enough that status quo is unacceptable. So in each little way, let's fight to change it because we are better than this.
Absolutely. I think we might have one more question coming in that we'll just give an opportunity to answer. Let me just find that. Okay, what have your ICE contacts said about the series? Do they think the series was objective, and did they take issue with the way the agency and its employees were depicted?
Great question. I think it's been a mix. A lot of the agents themselves we've spoken to a number of them, and some like it, some don't, but everybody felt that this is portraying what ICE is and how the inside of the system looks. When the series launched back in August, we had a communication with a couple officers right away, and we said we'd love to hear your feedback, hear what you think, and once you watch the series, like, give us a call. And what do you mean watch it? He's like, what? Once you watch the whole thing? Well, we all watched it this morning. We binged it.
Which was like 12 hours after it was released.
So there was some of that. There's also a couple individuals that we, really appreciated it.
Our conversation with the ICE agents that we spent years with in cars, in border, was diverse. A lot of them really did agree. Some of them had a hard time with this or that, but it was extremely different than the conversation with the
The
government leadership in ICE and DHS legal, which really pushed back on the show, called it not true, felt betrayed. The officers themselves felt very different. They felt that we tackled a reality in a complex way. And some of them, some of them said, listen, it's not easy to look in this mirror. This is a tough situation. And I think me and Christina really understand more than a lot of viewers that get upset with, and we try and say it in every Q&A, that it's an incredibly difficult job, particularly under this administration. Regardless, a lot of them feel that it's great that this Trump administration is backing them, but they're so hated and nobody wants to be hated. A lot of them think that they're achieving nothing because they've created fear. People are shutting the doors, and let's face it, there's much more resistance, there's more activism, there's more legal help from ACLU, there's more money flooding into. But in large, there was a huge difference between leadership and official and real people in the system who felt that this was a true reality.
I think there was one comment that really surprised us.
Oh yeah, Mike.
And it was Mike, who's in episode 6. He's the Homeland Security guy who comes across very human, is very compassionate, if you will, and says, I would.
I feel for these people who are doing exactly what I did, what I would do in a position to flee, and I feel hard putting handcuffs on them.
And his response to that comment was, although I appreciate it, it makes me seem like I'm not supporting the mission.
So he was actually, we thought, we would get complaints from officers that we show him in a negative way or as hard hitting. This was clearly a comment that surprised us. But this is after show comes out after Black Lives Matter movement, and he said, listen, that quote that I was sympathetic to immigrants really made people distrust me, and I fear I will not be promoted. And I fear that I will, you can't do that right now in law enforcement. And we thought to ourselves, wow, that is very telling, that by feeling compassion to other, you are not supporting the mission. That is a sad thing.
Wow.
And it's his truth. He feels, that's how he feels.
Well, Shaul and Christina, thank you so much for your time with us this evening. I know that our Pacific Council members really appreciate this, and those that participated in the Culture Club conversation before this, I know that they had said that they really were moved by the series as well. And so thank you for bringing your talent into the world and for sharing your time with us today. And that's all for our conversation today. Thank you to all who joined us, and we'll be signing off.
Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.